Hello and welcome aboard. I want to call today's conversation Full Circle. This comes to you after a discussion with a cruiser that I met a couple of weeks ago. Young fellow out cruising with his family from Scotland. Great conversation, and he put a question to me that brought me right back to my own origins in this lifestyle 35 years ago. His question was, in the time that you've been living aboard and cruising and traveling, what has changed the most? This brought about instant recall to a weekend in the early 90s when I was invited to participate with some friends in an event that used to be called the Black Dog Dash. There I met an Australian who had 27 years prior built himself a plywood Piver trimaran and had been sailing it around the world continuously ever since. And so, as a young aspiring cruiser who had just started out, my question to him was the same as I was asked a couple of weeks ago: what's changed the most? The Australian's answer was GPS. Without the need to learn celestial navigation and the fear of doing so, essentially cruising was open to everybody, and everybody was getting into it. I found my own answer was not quite so easy, because changes have been so rapid and so obvious in the last 30 years that certainly GPS was the grandfather, but there have been many offspring in terms of technology and change. And so my answer broke down into a few parts that I want to discuss today. So the first thing I thought of when I looked back over the last 30 years over what has changed, or what has changed the most dramatically, was connectivity. I thought about the fact that when I started out living aboard, cell phones were pretty clunky and somewhat unreliable analog device. There was very little internet at that point anywhere, but there certainly was no internet connectivity through an analog brick phone. You did think it was pretty hot stuff when you got that first pocket-sized cell phone, but you certainly weren't ordering from Amazon on it. So these days it seems like connectivity is the be-all and end-all priority. You've probably seen the YouTube videos of boats that clearly have features that are, well, at best unseaworthy. Directly above a Starlink dish. It's without saying at this point that for a lot of people, the ability to connect to the internet maybe even exceeds the priority of oxygen and food. That might seem hypocritical coming to you from this venue, but keep in mind I'm talking about what has changed. And so it seems to me that these days there are a lot of people who prioritize internet connectivity over what in 30 years ago's time would have been the priority of experience, maybe doing offshore passages with those of more experience. Cars don't even come with spare tires anymore because, frankly, you're expected to get yourself out of that situation with your thumbs, fix it with the phone, so to speak. I'm not saying that this is the end of an era or anything else. It's change, and that's what I'm talking about today, are changes. I think it goes without saying that these days you'll see Starlink dishes on boats that, well, given the schizophrenic pricing plans of Starlink, you might think to yourself that money might have been better spent on a rig inspection or a new set of sails that wouldn't rip halfway through your passage. But again, we each sail our own ship, and we all set our own priorities. What has changed in this regard to me is that I think perhaps there's been an attempt to substitute um, technology and access to information for experience. And yeah, there's a tremendous value to internet experience or internet collective knowledge. I'm the first one to rave about YouTube University, but you have to keep in mind that if you don't have experience, then when you go to collect that information on the internet, uh, you may find that, well, in the words of the restaurant review for an all-you-can-eat buffet that opened near me at one point, the review title was "All You Can Eat and None of It Good." So, in conclusion to this point, if you think that sailing across an ocean, all you need is a Starlink dish and a working computer, my answer to you is you're probably at some point in that process going to realize that there is no Amazon drop order shipment to the middle of the Atlantic just yet. So the second point that came up for discussion about the last 30 years and what's changed was mooring versus anchoring. In the early 90s, when I started cruising the New England area, it was pretty typical that municipalities would maintain a small mooring field, and at that point I think it was about $10 a night to rent a mooring from the local town you were visiting. Those mooring fees have exploded, and you'll know this if you've been in New England cruising, that typically on the low end it's 60 and on the high end $100 or more a night to tie up to a mooring. Notice I didn't say a mooring ball. You want the whole thing top to bottom. Anyway, discussion with a friend about this, he brought up the valid counterpoint that everything has changed price-wise. Money value changes and roughly halves every, I think he said every 20 years or so, which makes good sense. But I would put it in this perspective. In the early 90s, if I sailed to Vineyard Haven and paid $10 a night to rent a mooring rather than anchor, that $10 a night did not represent 10% of my daily earnings, even as a young guy just out of college. If I took what I earned per week and divided it by 7 days, I could go away on the weekend and come back home without having dented my budget. I would like to be able to say that my income has gone up 7.5 times over the course of my career, but that just hasn't been my reality. So I think if you look at it now, there are relatively few people out here, particularly younger folks, who can say that spending $75 to $100 a night is an inconsequential expense. And second part of this point is that in order to bring about this change, some would say, well, municipalities have pump out boats now, they have shower facilities in some places, they have far better support. Maybe they do, and maybe some of that support is beneficial, but I don't personally see a whole lot of value to every town you go to having a military grade gunboat for the assistant harbor master versus the center console open boat that was his own boat that Don King used to come around and collect the $10 from every night in Vineyard Haven back in the early 90s. I don't know that things have advanced on a par. So, but how do towns get people to fork over this relatively large chunk of a modest cruising budget? Well, the way they do it is they either expand the mooring field so that there's simply no more room to anchor in sheltered water, or they outright, through regulation, ban anchoring. Now, I've seen that happen in a number of places that I used to really enjoy visiting. And there's this sort of triple alliance that you will see occur here in New England. And it works like this. The shoreside property owners have paid vast sums for these beautiful waterfront properties. And there seems to be a desire by a lot of them to control what goes on beyond the waterfront boundary and out on the water of a sheltered harbor or a lake. So they have a vested interest in seeing the the loud party rafts and the large influx of visitors in the summer controlled and reduced. Then you have the municipalities, and of course to them I think in a lot of cases, and I've had this stated directly to me, an anchored boat is a loss to them. They see that every boat that visits should be contributing. And well and good, you should in some way contribute to the communities you visit. But this insistence that those contributions be monetary and that they pay for ever increasing budgets and ever larger pools of equipment, and in other words, that those contributions cannot be secondary or participation in local economy and events. And we all contribute in different ways. Some of us monetarily and some of us in more esoteric ways. It's always been important to me to interact and work into the weave of the fabric of places that I visit. I don't want to just be a camera-toting tourist. But that's been taken away by this new attitude that if you don't pay at the gate, you're not worthy of entry. So probably the biggest change in that regard is that by saying that that anchoring is in somehow damaging, the municipalities have been able to team up and become sort of one mind with the property owners, so that they can say, well, we're able to say who comes and goes, and essentially. The third spoke in this wheel has been from the green religion movement, and you might consider it harsh that I put it in those terms, but I've heard people say that eelgrass contributes more oxygen to the environment than the Amazon rainforest, and frankly that just pushes my limits of credibility a little bit beyond. So the third spoke, as I say, is that the towns and the locals have basically gone out and said, well, if you anchor, you're damaging the eelgrass. And to some degree, I think that is true. But the hand has been tipped when the local towns have said, so we need to ban anchoring and install traditional moorings permanently. The reason I say the hand is tipped is because it'll be pretty clear to anybody who understands it that the heavy tackle and chain of a mooring that spends 365 days a year resting on and scouring the bottom is probably doing more damage than the boat that comes in and anchors 2 nights a week with lighter tackle. So what is that $70 fee? Well, the $70 fee is it is a filter for the sort of elite waterfront property owners to say, if you can't rise to this bar, stay away. It is a probably even more important. It's an absolution fee. It's a penance that you pay to an all too eager to receive it town, municipality, that essentially corrects your sin of having damaged the eelgrass, and that doesn't sit well with me. I find that some of the most interesting cruisers are not the ones for whom $2,000 or $3,000 a month is just pocket change. That may be their whole budget or more. So to me, this change has been the most damaging, and it's the one that causes my cruising grounds to expand beyond the local area and to constrict within the local area to just a few places left. It's not an improvement. And then I think finally, the third point, which is somewhat tied to the second uh, change over the last 30 years that I've seen, is that the ability to acquire an inexpensive boat and make it seaworthy through your own labors, your own efforts, your own experience has largely vanished. Not because the boats aren't available. In fact, boats, if anything, of relatively seaworthy quality have become, I think, comparatively less expensive over 30 years. The problem, or the reason for that more than any other, is that dockage and mooring costs, due to the simple principle of supply and demand, has increased exponentially. So whereas a young person could once just go acquire an inexpensive boat and count on being able to find someplace affordable to place it once it was ready, you know, typically that would be a mooring, but in some cases a municipal or other marina. These days the cost of the boat pales in comparison to the cost of the mooring facility. And of course there are waiting lists. There are, lengthy processes for, depending on where you are, for even finding a spot. So just acquiring the boat and making it seaworthy is almost pointless now if you haven't got a place to put it once you've done that. And to me, this is really a shame, because you used to encounter people who were just living by the seat of their pants out here, and I'm not advocating that that's the best way, but it was one of the ways that people managed to get out and go cruising. That is becoming a great rarity. And you might say, well, yeah, but now there are all kinds of ways of making up for this increasing cost. You can be a YouTuber, you can be, lots of things. Circling back around to the original discussion of connectivity, and that is good. This is just the human nature of finding ways to deal with changing times. So I guess in a way, maybe that's what I'm doing right here. But it's a change, and it's a change that's worth noting, because with that change comes a change in the demographic and in the attitudes, and in the herd. The herd becomes different than it was at one point. So none of these are meant to discuss catastrophic end or doomsday. That's not what I mean in this discussion. But those are the things that I think over the course of the last 35 years have been the most noticeable and the most obvious changes. So thanks for coming aboard today, and please feel free to jump into the discussion and tell me what you think has changed over the course of your cruising life, and like and share and comment and subscribe. So we'll see you next week.